Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, July the 9th in beautiful Victoria. I'd like to thank our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. So Walter, we're trying to do more issues, more with less. I'll start off on the climate change front. Record flooding in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and Hurricane Arthur in the Maritimes that left a record number of people there without electricity. And zero mention of the words climate change related to these two events anywhere in the media. And why? Because, in my opinion anyways, gas, oil, cars, and consumption are big business, and corporate Canada does not want people thinking of climate change because it might hurt their business if we knew how close to disaster we may be. It seems that our rulers would rather see us dead than tell us the truth. We have to drive less, buy less, use less, and it's life and death. And plus, call your politician and call your media and tell them that, they've got us on the wrong road.
Yeah, and it's reality. The storms are happening. I have family in New Brunswick. The power is still out in parts of New Brunswick as of yesterday. So it was a terrific storm. It was a very, very heavy windstorm, a lot of flooding, pretty serious consequences. And it's, as they say, very early in the hurricane season. And so we can probably are in for quite a summer and fall this year for, a dramatic storm events. So it's serious.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, how much longer can they continue to pretend it's not happening? In Germany, I know they're taking huge strides towards alternative energy. That's what we have to do. We've got to completely change the path we're on. It is life and death.
There's no doubt about that.
Moving on.
Well, I brought in a couple of topics. One thing I was working on was I see in the weekly papers, you see the Goldstream News and all that. On occasion, you see these editorials. I saw one last week about the teachers, of course, and
Saanich News, Oak Bay News.
yeah, and it said our view, but I saw it in two or three other of the weeklies. I was wondering, well, whose view is it? So I was phoning around, these papers and asking them. I could never talk to anyone. But I just gave them the question, could you tell me whose view is this, exactly whose view it is? And no one's phoned me back to tell me whose view it is.
So this is the editorial in all the news group papers that get delivered to everybody's house.
It's not blanketed. It isn't put in every weekly, but you'll see this sort of thing happen several weeklies at a time. Now, I'm assuming it's the owner of the newspaper's view, but I can't say for sure. And of course, I took exception to what the View was saying about the teachers, which is all backwards and misconstrued, and it's all about wages, according to them, when we know it isn't. What the teachers are asking for is very, very small settlement, below which several other settlements have been made with the public sector this year. So it's not about wages. It's something else, but they want to present it that way, that the teachers are somehow greedy or something. The teachers have spent 3 or 4 years now without any wage increase at all. And so it's not about that. It's about working conditions, and it's all about the fact that the Liberal government stripped from their contract their rights to negotiate working conditions. And if you can't negotiate working conditions, you don't really have a union. The government knows that. They've ignored 2 Supreme Court rulings against them. They've now hired a bigwig lawyer to appeal this again. And the government is just hell-bent on smashing this union. And that's what it's all about. And with the aid of this type of media presentation, which is so biased, and basically, if you look at the actual figures they're using, are wrong. But nobody seems to be able to challenge them. And it's a huge problem.
To me, it's interesting that throughout this whole issue, it's always categorized by the media as a teacher's strike. And when you start off by saying that, then it's like the teachers are to blame for this whole thing. Many times I've heard in different places in the media the Minister of Education, who represents Christy Clark, coming on as if he and the government were above the fray. All we want, they say in the media, is for this to be settled and for children to be back in school. What a load of absolute nonsense. And yet, they're allowed to say it. And the media keeps telling us it's a teacher strike. If you characterize it instead as a corporate attack on public education being carried out by a puppet government,
Yeah.
then, you know, if you say that a few dozen times, you start to see it in a different way. Now, I'm not saying that this is a corporate attack on public
Yeah.
education carried out by a puppet government, but is it just a teacher strike? Is there only one group involved here? You know, that's the way the media operates. They set kind of an idea in everybody's mind, which isn't really the right idea. And it's powerful. It's very powerful. The media is powerful. That's why the corporations
Well,
own
it's,
it.
it's all about framing the issue, isn't it, Jack? You put the issue in a certain context and people try to understand it. But of course, if you were saying in the context of a teacher strike and there's two sides, the government and the teachers, well, the Supreme Court of BC didn't see it that way. They asked the Liberal government's chief negotiator, were you trying to provoke the teachers to have a strike? And he said yes.
Now, this is going back about a year, right? Or a
Yeah,
couple-
when the rule-
Yeah. So in court,
Yeah, under oath.
Under oath, the chief negotiator for the provincial government, you
Yeah.
know, a while back, was asked the question.
Were you trying to provoke a strike with the teachers by being setting such onerous conditions and not relenting on never offering any fair wage or anything like that? And he answered yes, that was his job. That's what he was trying to do.
Now, we may be mischaracterizing a few of the words here, but that, as I recall, is basically the story. But that was never mentioned in the media. It was really downplayed as if it wasn't important. And yet here we are a short time later with the strike as,
Yeah.
you know, or with, I mean, you know, and it's the same with the issue I started off
Yeah.
with, climate change. There they simply don't mention it. The floods happen, the fires happen, the droughts happen. And they just don't say climate change as if there's no connection because they want us buying.
Yeah.
I was listening to CKNW radio out of Vancouver earlier this week. The program was about homelessness. The message I got from the program was that homelessness was deliberate. There were just a couple of phone calls that came in and they just made that case. Homelessness is deliberate. People are homeless because they want to be. And, you know, we're often told that homelessness is deliberate and people are on the street because they want to be. I also think that homelessness is deliberate. I think the people who run this country are deliberately creating homelessness. And when I say the people who run the country, I mean the 1% of the 1%, the super rich and the giant corporations, the people who own the media and control our governments. I think they want homelessness. And that's why we have it. And in fact, I've watched them create homelessness over the past 30 years, with huge tax cuts and profits for themselves, paid for by taking everything away from the people at the bottom, and then refusing to allow us to build homes for the homeless. Even though it's cheaper to build homes for the homeless and solve the problem, a lot of the problem, our rulers refuse to do it. And instead, our rulers keep the homeless on the street deliberately. For me, the media and the politicians, they're the puppets. There's a ruling class above them that call the shots and make it happen. I don't know who they are, but you know, they're represented through the corporations and the owners of the corporations. That's what we're up against. Deliberate homelessness caused by the people who run this country. They're trying to destroy our country.
You know, it's so easy to fall through the cracks in this system. It's so hard to get a job that pays. It's so hard to be organized enough to be able to pay rent. I mean, it's a stretch for a lot of people. If you have any deficiencies in your abilities, you fall through the cracks. But I've always wondered, you know, okay, they're on the street now, and they're, as you say, it's costing the taxpayers more money than had they just been provided housing. But why do you think the corporate interests would want to see people on the street? Like, what is the impact on our society that they think that that's acceptable? Is it something to create fear in our society? Is it?
I would say that's part of it, to destabilize our society.
Yeah.
One thing they definitely use it for, I think, is to damage the downtown areas of a city and push people out into the malls, which they own. All the malls are totally corporate. The downtown is usually different, right? So, I mean, that's one way they use it specifically, but I think the bigger picture is just a destabilization of society. That seems to be what they want.
Yeah, and they just don't seem to care. I mean, that's the bottom line, one way or the other. It doesn't.
Yeah, and again,
seem to
maybe
affect
I'm
them.
wrong, but
You know.
when you see it happen step by step, how they pull the federal government out of creating social housing,
Yeah.
how they send jobs overseas, how they spend more to have somebody sleeping on a mat on a cement floor through the winter when that costs more than providing housing. You'd say it's insane, but it's not insane. It has to be part of a deliberate, well thought out plan.
It's almost like an emergency response industry and you bring in the healthcare system, the emergency rooms, and how many people are in there. It's quite an industry.
That's right. Or maybe we're wrong.
Now, I wanted to bring up the fact that today is a day that a national organization in Canada called Canadians for Safe Technology, and we run a website on the show. I hope people visit. It's C with the letter 4ST. They had a national press conference today in Ottawa, and they're asking the Health Canada to develop real regulations, protective regulations for citizens of Canada for exposure to cell phone type radiation and wireless type radiation. And they are bringing up the fact that Health Canada at this point really has not acted. They've been stonewalling. And when they were asked to review the current standards that are very deficient, they took that and asked the Royal Society of Canada, which is just basically an industry lobby group with a fancy name. So the studies pertaining to negative health effects were brought to the Royal Society of Canada, were brought to the industry for the industry to review, and asking the industry for recommendations as to whether or not the government should regulate them more. So surprise, surprise, they came back with recommendations saying everything is fine, you don't do anything, everything's working great. But it isn't. We know the measures, Canada's safety standards are very, very lax. They're hundreds of times less than other jurisdictions. And the model that they've used for harm from, say, exposure to a cell phone or to Wi-Fi networks is based upon how much energy it takes to heat tissue, heat your body up, as in microwave it. And of course, everybody else is concerned with health effects that the radiation can cause at much, much lower levels of exposure. So the Canadians for Safe Technology is asking the Health Canada to reconsider and to do something more realistic.
So what would be a country that has high standards, better standards than
Well,
us?
Russia and China, for instance, surprisingly,
Okay, let's take Russia then. The standards are much better than ours.
Yeah.
But people still have cell phones.
That's right.
So what's the difference to somebody like me? I mean, I'd like to see better standards because I'd like to be protected from the radiation. But so in Russia, they've got better standards, but they still have cell phones. What's the difference?
Well, you can still have pretty well everything you want in wireless technology, but much less power, signal strength.
So in other words, we could still have just about everything we want here in Canada, but with lower signal strength.
Oh yeah, the technology, and if we really went after it and really refined the technology, you could drop the radiation levels by thousands of times. Right now, there's no standards to protect you for your health. It's only to protect you from your tissue heating, and we're getting close to that too in some areas. So, you know, you can imagine the strength of some of this radiation, and It's just the Wild West. There's nothing to limit
Is
what
that
these guys.
cheaper for the
Oh,
companies?
absolutely.
Okay.
The technology is not refined.
Now, there's no question that cell phone radiation and Wi-Fi is dangerous. There's absolutely no question about that. So it seems like, why wouldn't our governments just say to the companies, hey, you got to spend a bit more money, or maybe even a lot more money, in order to protect the people of Canada from this radiation? Because it's exactly, to me, it's exactly like smoking. Just
Yeah.
like the massive catastrophe that smoking was and has been and still is for so many people is going to happen because of cell phones. And you know, it's not going to be pretty. This is corporate and governmental mass murder, and they know it.
Well, of all the issues in smoking, I don't know how many smokers there are in the world, but there's 5 billion cell phone accounts. So if this is a mistake, Jack, it's a big one, bigger than anything else we've ever seen. And the industry has had their way. They've run it. They've called the shots on this, and there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering. And if we had anyone in Ottawa that would take care of this issue, or if the Health Canada would come to their senses, but don't count on it. No matter what you're presenting to these guys, they absolutely are stonewalling. And the only way we could really get anything happening would be through some kind of public pressure. And with the media being like it is, of course, that's a huge encumbrance, because it's very hard to let the public know that they have a health issue. And anybody that's watching, I challenge anybody that's watching, by the way, to give me research that show me that this type of radiation is safe. And you'll hear the case, oh, well, the studies that were presented, said this and that, and you'll have critics that'll parse out a word here and there in the study and say that it's invalid. There are, in fact, Jack, over 20,000 studies that show harm of one sort or another, of exposure and everyday levels of exposure. And, you can only stay in denial so long. And anybody that doesn't think that's the case, please give me your evidence, including all the industry representatives that are probably going, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Bring us your evidence that this technology is safe. I sure wish it was. But the evidence is just not there to show that it is. So this group, the Canadians for Safe Technology, is headed up by a man named Frank Clegg. He's the ex-CEO of Microsoft Canada, 15-year CEO for Microsoft Canada, and last year he started this new group, the Canadians for Safe Technology. This might be a guy that might know of harm. He might be hip to the scene. And I think one of the problems that Frank is throwing in, the wrench that he's throwing into the works, is that he's a corporate guy. He's Mr. Businessman, and he's just saying we're not accusing anybody of anything. We think we can bring this evidence to the Minister of Health, and she should be able to look at it and protect Canadians' health. And I really like the fact that they're doing that. That's a mistake I have been making for the last 20 years, of accusing Health Canada of being, corrupt. But they're not saying that. They're saying, no, we're going to bring this evidence forward, and you guys have to deal with it. So they're not going to be able to brush him off and that group off as well as they've been able to in the past.
Well, we'll see. So the press conference was today, which is Wednesday, July the 9th.
That's right.
We'll see if anybody sees, hears, or reads about
That's
the press
right.
conference.
Visit the website, Jack. That's why I was saying that we were going to post the website, because it was live streamed this morning, but you can see the whole thing.
And compare the coverage this issue is getting to the World Cup.
Yeah.
My third issue is why aren't some of our schools open at night, where the schools can be used as community centers? People can play badminton and sports. There can be classes and talks, hobby groups, and exercise, fitness, health classes. The schools have great facilities, and they sit there, and we own them, but they are usually closed and cut off from the neighborhoods around them. And why? Personally, I think schools are closed because schools represent community, and the people who run Canada don't want community. They want you to be in their malls shopping, or they want you watching TV where they completely control the message, They don't want you in schools, in community, doing just the kinds of things that people always do. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's sure what I think.
Well, that is a great idea. Like, I haven't really thought about it that much, but you think about, why don't they in Victoria and one central school allow a school to be open in the evening for community classes, for community workshops, for free activities? I'm sure there's insurance issues and costs of lighting and all sort of stuff that they're factoring in. But if they tried one school and do a pilot project to see how the community might use that school in ways other than and just having it open during the day for the kids, I think it could work.
Yeah. So there it is. We'll see. There's so many things that need doing, and we've got 1 minute left. Last issue, if there is anything.
Well, I did a little bit of research, quotation marks, on the Supreme Court of Canada, trying to figure out the makeup of the Supreme Court of Canada. It's made up of eight judges and the Chief Justice, 9 people, 6 of whom have been appointed by Stephen Harper. So politics being what they are, do you think Stephen Harper would choose an unbiased sort of judge? So I think the Conservatives have control over the Supreme Court. And I think that it just doesn't bode well for us when the Supreme Court might bring down rulings that, are a little more weighted towards what the corporate interests like. And we're not allowing progressive legislation to occur either. Yeah. Basically just abiding by the way it is, and instead of, making suggestions for more fairer legislation and fair laws.
Walter, I'll disagree with you on that one, only because I think the Supreme Court has been doing some good stuff, I hope. Anyways, we're out of time.
See you next week, Jack.
Next week, or not. And thanks for watching Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. We are going to be talking with Terry Dance Benink, and we're going to be talking about the tar sands and the Victoria Tar Sands Healing Walk that happened back in June. So, Terry, do you want to do a bit of an intro, or should we just start with the questions?
Well, maybe I could just explain sort of how that healing walk came to pass. And it started in part with me going to the tar sands last September. I'd had breast cancer about 3 years ago, and after that, I sort of felt a connection between my health and the health of the planet, and I knew that I wanted to do more than just sign a petition. So I thought, take yourself there, go see the tar sands for yourself. And I just knew that I would come back changed, and I did. And do you want me maybe to share a bit of the 2 big things that hit me the most about that trip? We were there for 2 weeks, and I think what upset me the most were the devastation of the land and the way the First Nations and the oil and gas workers are being treated in terms of their health. So in terms of the land, what we saw, I got to hold bitumen, and it's a thick, sticky stuff that is going to sink. It's not going to float the way the oil and gas industry says. We watched footage of the surface mining that goes on there, and Neil Young's not exaggerating when he says it's like Hiroshima. I mean, it's just, the land is just like the moon or Mars. And I guess the other thing that really struck me was the tailings. They call them tailings ponds, but they're tailings lakes. They're 176 square kilometers filled with toxic chemicals and with water and sand, and they're leaching into the Athabasca River and into the groundwater. They're unlined. There's no cement, no metal, just earth.
I'm sure it's all perfectly safe, though.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, even Environment Canada just recently in the Times columnist was quoted as saying it is leaching into the groundwater and it's a real safety concern. But nothing has been done. And that sort of led me to the second I guess, reality that really shocked me, and that was when we got to Fort Mackay, which is where the First Nations, the Cree, Chippewan First Nations, they cannot drink their tap water. So there are huge big bottles of water sitting on their porches or in front of their houses because the water from the tap is so toxic that it has increased their cancer rates. Their newborn children and pregnant women are told, do not drink tap water. And we had the privilege of actually meeting with Selena Harper, who's a Cree Chippewayan elder, and her husband was behind us as we interviewed her in their bedroom. And I mean, he's basically dying of cancer, and he's worked for years in that industry. And she said when she gives him a bath, she has to put antibiotic salve on him because the bath water is so toxic. So that's, and I just, you know, we just kept saying, if this was Victoria, there'd be no way that this would be tolerated. And so we asked Dr. John O'Connor.
Don't be so sure about that, but
Yeah. And Dr. John O'Connor, I have such admiration for him.
now Dr. John O'Connor, a name we never hear about, but he is one of the few doctors up there who dares to treat people and speak the truth.
Exactly.
And you know, he's a Canadian hero who
He is
we
a
never
Canadian
hear
hero.
about because the media chooses not to tell us about what's really going on
Yeah.
on this planet.
Yeah. And I mean, he's been at it, as you said, for 10 years. I feel he's a prophet in the wilderness, you know, and he keeps asking for a comprehensive health assessment of the region, and the Alberta government, which is like this with the industry, has just refused. And so he's still battling up there.
I seem to remember several years ago they tried to take
Yes,
away
they
his medical license.
Yes, they
right?
did.
Imagine that, the Canadian government tried to take away the medical license of a doctor
know.
for daring to say that
Exactly.
people are being poisoned by the tar sands.
Exactly.
And again, kept completely secret. I'm sure not 1 in 100 Canadians ever heard about this.
Nope. I mean, and that's the thing, the tar sands is the size of Florida, but it's out of sight, out of mind. I mean, if it was right next door, we'd all be up in arms, but it's so far away and most people have never traveled
Yeah.
to see it. You know?
And of course, it is kept secret. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
look at the amount of coverage, as I often say, the World Cup is getting
Yeah.
compared to the coverage. We never see the pictures, the photos,
Exactly.
the reality, the people dying, the people being made
Exactly.
sick. It's just kept hidden from us by our politicians, who are totally undemocratic,
Yeah.
and our media, which is totally owned by corporate Canada, who's making lots of money,
I know.
poisoning us.
I know. The one thing that really, you know, when I came home, I was feeling overwhelmed and depressed for sure. But what kept going through my mind was Selena, the Cree Chippewan elder. Her parting words were, "Go back home and spread the word." And so that's how the healing walk came to pass, because she said, we're so isolated up here. People don't know in Victoria, in Vancouver. They just don't know what we're dealing with. So when I got back, I started giving talks at local churches. And at my church, Esquimalt United, the minister, Leanne Benoit, after she heard the talk and heard about the annual walk that goes through the tar sands each year, she said, why don't we do a walk here in Victoria? And lo and behold, you know, 6 months later, we held a walk that close to 300 people came out to, and we walked all the way through downtown Victoria on June 28th. And it was a spiritual healing walk, not so much a protest march, but it was a walk in which we mourned the damage that humans have caused, you know, to the earth, to the water, to the air, but also celebrated Mother Earth and celebrated the resilience. I mean, even if we mess it all up, the planet will probably survive.
Probably. Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Anyways. You just mentioned the workers as well, and maybe you can say
Yeah.
a few words about that.
Yeah, and that was quite striking too, is that in the annual walk that took place through the tar sands each year, when they march for about 8 hours, and as they do, the huge trucks are being driven by the workers. They honk their horns and they give the thumbs up in support, because they know, they're there, workers go there to make a lot of money, maybe for a year, 2 years, and then leave. And they know their health is compromised. But what I guess angers me is that they can leave, but the First Nations can't. They're stuck. That's their land that's been totally overrun. They are surrounded by oil companies.
Well, when she says spread the word, what word does she want you and us to spread?
To spread the truth about the health impacts and the fact that the First Nations up there are dying of cancer and related respiratory diseases. And B, to do what we can to stop the expansion of the pipelines and tankers off our coast. It goes together.
I would think that by the time the oil companies are finished, Alberta will be poisoned, maybe not completely from top to bottom, but certainly at the top.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where do you want to go down to why did so many faith communities join together?
Yeah. I think mainly because we were all shocked by the Enbridge decision. We know Kinder Morgan is out there, and if Kinder Morgan's approved, it's going to mean 7 times the number of tankers going right past Victoria, out the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And so I think, and we knew the situation that the First Nations are facing, and felt that we needed to do more than just apologize for the actions of our ancestors. So we thought we need to put our bodies on the line. We need to march in solidarity as they marched at the same time up north. And that it's a justice issue. When we each thought from our various faith perspectives what our founders would be doing. For me, I thought about what would Christ be doing. He'd be out there. He would be healing, and he would be demanding justice. And so we were thrilled because we ended up with a whole variety of different faith communities, including the Quakers, the Buddhists, Catholics, Anglicans, United Church, Esquimalt Baha'i, who have I left out? Anglicans. And we were supported actively by Dogwood Initiative and by Sierra Club BC. So it was a beautiful partnership of faith communities plus environmental movement. And the actual walk was beautiful. We would stop at various places and hold rituals and spend time in silence reflecting on the earth, the air, the water, and fire. And I think people really appreciated, instead of having just, vehement chants, we were calling for healing, and it was a time of reflection and ritual. And then when we closed, our closing ceremony, though, we came back on the issue of First Nations and the tar sands. And we were thrilled. We asked people, we said, one of the ways we can help as faith communities is to dig deep into our wallet. So we raised $1,600 for the legal challenges that the First Nations have, many, many legal challenges underway. And the money goes to Raven Trust. That's the website, I believe, that's underneath my name. And they're the folks who raised the money for the recent Supreme Court decision that's just come down. They were part of that whole campaign, and they're wonderful people. Just a small organization.
What Supreme Court decision was that?
It was the one about the Silquatan Nation, which is huge. So the legal firm that was handling that is Raven fundraises for them.
So is that decision, which happened just a week or two ago, that said that First Nations have to be more than consulted with, is that going to do anything to the tar sands?
I think it's a huge victory. It doesn't settle everything, but it really is a historic precedent, because it will mean that the First Nations have to be taken seriously, that they cannot be, treated as just.
Well, they cannot be poisoned, which they're being poisoned.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
But I guess I still feel, some people say, oh, well, we'll just let the First Nations wage the fight. And our response is no way, because first of all, it's going to cost millions to do all these legal challenges, and they need to be supported. And that's why many of us are doing things like supporting a province-wide vote across BC, like the HST referendum. That's something that I'm spending nearly all my time working
that's
on.
the initiative put forward
Yeah.
by the Dogwood
Yeah.
Initiative to.
So, things like supporting that and mobilizing people in the South to take action, around the expansion of the pipelines and tankers off our coast. But also, at the closing ceremony, we suggested people divest their savings from companies like Enbridge.
So you mean people should be pulling any of their investments that they have in the oil industry
Yep.
out?
Yep,
And
I
the
did
logic,
that.
yeah.
I'm invested with Raymond James, and I asked them to take me out of Enbridge. I want no part of it. So it's doable.
Yeah, I think a lot of universities are.
They
so-
are. They are.
So how is it going? Are we winning or losing on that? I mean, it's a disaster, and of course we're all part of it because we're all driving cars and we're all doing all the things that oil is used for. What are the directions that all of us can do besides supporting these groups in our everyday life and in
Yeah.
the governments we elect?
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. First is that Guy Dauncey, from the BC Sustainable Energy Association, he keeps harping that 1/3 of our emissions could be lowered if we all, individually, corporately, were to adopt more efficiency modes, in our homes, in our cars, et cetera. And I believe him. Walk more, cycle more, drive less, et cetera. So that's something we can all do. And the second is to make sure that when I'm working on this initiative, so that if Christy Clark does not maintain her stance of being opposed, we will be prepared to trigger, a referendum like the HST. And then, of course, we'll be prepared for the federal election. And I think a lot of people feel that there has to be a change, that the Harper government is just isn't listening and is just consumed with finding ways to enable the
I
huge...
think the Federal Liberal Party, though, also supports the Enbridge pipeline, don't they?
I'm not somebody who's totally active in political parties, so I'm not totally sure about that, but I do know that there's got to be a big change in the fall of 2016.
How about the issue of liquefied natural gas? Kind of that same huge problem, which is coming at us just from a slightly different direction. Are you involved with that at all?
I'm not personally at this point, other than that I am concerned. I'm also a member of Sierra Club BC, and I know they're very concerned about fracking and the danger of what that can do in terms of causing earthquakes. So, but I pick my battles. And with the faith community, I think we felt really strongly that we needed to really be focused on the tar sands and First Nations. And so those are my priorities right now.
When you say the faith community, does that mean people who are members of the churches, or does it also mean the churches themselves as an organization?
That's a good question. I would say that in our healing walk, it was the United Church Presbytery in Victoria endorsed it formally. Other faith communities were a little more nervous about doing that because we used the word tar sands. We called it the way it was. And I think there's still discussion and debate that needs to go on, amongst congregations, because there's a wide diversity of people. But 300 people nonetheless came out. And I think there is a real concern, a growing concern within the multi-faith community for us to not be on the sidelines.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a big role for the churches to play in protecting the earth now, and I think that's happening more and more.
Exactly. And to contribute, our perspective is we wish a democratic, peaceful, nonviolent movement, and that's something that we can bring. And we encourage people to pray. I pray for Harper, even though I feel very strongly about his politics. I still pray for him and the oil and gas executives, because they are suffering too from our addiction. to oil. So we're all in this together.
That's very well said. We're all in it together, and let's see if we can get out of it together. Terry, we've got about 30 seconds left. Any final words?
I think that was a good ending.
Okay. Thank you very much for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. The tar sands are one of the most important issues on the planet, certainly in Canada. God help us. Yeah. Welcome to the third segment of Citizens Forum. I'd like to thank again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. This is being filmed on Wednesday, July 9th. Our guest in this segment is Beau Filter. Beau is the author of the book, The Cause of War and Aggression, Wars and Aggression. Beau, a long time ago you were in the U.S. Navy.
That's right.
And we're going to be talking about, I guess, what I would call the #1 terrorist nation in the world today, which is the United States, which has nothing to do with the American people, just those who run the country.
That's correct, yes.
So you want to mention how you got started?
Well, I got started really by working in a top secret war room for the U.S. Navy back in the mid-60s. And
Shorter hair back then?
Pardon?
Shorter hair back then?
Oh, you have very short hair then. You're not allowed to have really hair. I didn't know I had hair, really. And I had the highest clearance in the U.S. military at the time. And I worked in a vault with warriors, officers that were planning wars around the world. And one day, I didn't usually listen to what they were talking about, but one day the red phone to the White House wasn't working. So they called me in right away because I'm the only one, I was the highest technician there, and I was the only one allowed to touch the red phone to the White House. So we found out where the problem was, and the officer said, well, you're going to have to stay here till it's up and running. So I'm just sitting there and listening to them do their morning briefing, and lo and behold, you know, they have this map. The entire wall is a map of the world, and it has all these lights flashing, different colors. And under each light, there's a little plaque with a number on it, which is an operation, military operation number. And then it would have under that something like a service 2M or 4M or 16M. And so I'm just listening there, and finally it just starting to get more curious and more curious. So I bump a radio and I said, what does that mean, service 4M? And he said, oh, they would kill 4 million civilians, that operation. And it just jolted me. I was shocked, so I really perked my ears up and I started really listening. And then I realized they were going through operation after operation, fine-tuning all these different operations around the world to control the world. You know, and this particular headquarters where I was working was in control of the Caribbean and the Southern Atlantic. So they're right in the mix of what the U.S. War planners were doing at the time, and that was mid-60s already. So that, when I realized that after they would discuss each operation, and they would go on to the next one, and they would just kind of blow on their cigars, and there was almost like a cool chill in the room. I was shocked because I realized there wasn't any conscience. I couldn't sense that amongst all these people that they really could register that they were going to kill an unlimited number of people. So when I went back to the barracks later, I asked guys about it. I said, boy, you guys have been watching this stuff every day. How come you don't say something about it? He said, well, we can't do anything about it. You know, I said, well, we should at least be thinking about it, you know. And finally, one little skinny friend from New York City said, well, boy, you know, when you get out, I think you should get your GI Bill and go and take psychology. And I said, what the heck is psychology? That's how I got started.
Well, that's a great beginning.
So then I became very thirsty to understand war, and so I did. I took 7 years of psychology, and that only wetted my whistle. I had to study decades beyond that to really realize what it would take to get to the fundamental psychology of war. And I don't mean just one war, I mean wars from the past, present, and what they're going to continue to do. What kind of psychological features are engaged in this? And so when you say, you know, the biggest terrorist group now, the United States, well, I can certainly can back that up from what I saw in that war room.
So now you wanted to talk a little bit about Ukraine because that's something that's happening right now. The story we're being told in our media and by our politicians is a story. I've learned through many wars that they've led us into and caused that I've stopped believing anything they say. But certainly there's another story out there about what's happening in the Ukraine, and it's very different from the story that we've been told. And I don't know where you want to go with it, but
Well, we can, the mass media, which is privatized media, sings a single perspective, which is basically the president's song of Russia has attacked the Ukraine. And that's an utter lie from all the people that are over there that are the victims of what's going on. It is a neo-Nazi push, re-engaged basically from the same people that were trying to rip Russia apart during World War II. And they were then called the Banderas for their hero, the Banderas. And many of those people now are in top level of government there, and they're literally just ripping Ukraine apart. But for the Western media, which is controlled by this one perspective, and it's a militarized perspective because they only want what the military agenda is all about, and that's they want all the oil, etc. And they're dividing it up in spoils. There's 24 regions in Ukraine, and 18 of them have already been given to top echelon people, oligarchs that with tons of money are now stripping the resources as fast as they can. But it isn't something that's just happening overnight. It started really in earnest in 1992 when, right after the Soviet Union collapsed, Western corporations moved in quickly and tried to grab as much as they could. And now, of course, now in the recent history, the fact that they weren't getting as much control as they wanted, and there was a leader that was going to sign a deal with Russia because it was much sweeter than the terrible deal that the Western IMF fund wanted to give them. So they decided, well, now it's the time to invade. And because we're not going to tolerate that, it just turns out that here comes the grandchildren of the Banderas of World War II. Now they're ready to go. So in effect, the United States has rekindled World War II. And the upper echelon of the United States that wanted to see Russia go down in World War II and that were never part of the punishment at Nuremberg or anything stayed in place. And now they've got these new Banderas, and they're called one of the groups, so we don't need to get into a list of all the groups that are involved, but one's called the Right Sector. And one of the leaders is the head of the military, and they're terrorizing pro-Ukrainian people all around the country, but mostly in the east. And tens of thousands are running to the Russian border to escape being murdered by these new Nazis.
So, I mean, I remember reading months ago as this whole thing started that there was a kind of neo-Nazi element involved in this move to push the government of the Ukraine out, and then there was a coup. There was certainly a lot of popular anger against the government,
yes.
But it seems that those who eventually took over were supported by elements from the United States and Europe as well.
Well, they like this term soft coup because what they do is they get behind a genuine protest,
Right.
unarmed protest, and then they pull out the guns and start shooting. And so then the Nazis moved in behind that, and then, of course, the peaceful protesters are bewildered. Well, we don't have guns. Where's all these guns coming from? And in the end, we find out there's Nazi snipers on the rooftop killing the police and the protesters to have a huge, oh, look, now this is, this is a Russian government shooting the protesters, and now we've got to take over the government. But that's
right. The way it was portrayed to us, as I recall, and I wasn't watching a lot of television at the time, was that the former government of the Ukraine was guilty of shooting people. But later it turned out there were real questions about who the snipers were working for.
Right. Well, it turned, it's in hindsight, you can see a lot more and a lot more information comes in. But it was the right sector people involved with them that were on the rooftops were the snipers.
Very much like what they did in Venezuela a number of years ago when they wanted to get rid of Chavez there.
Yes, there's a boilerplate thing that they use, the CIA and the Pentagon. It's their standard destabilization program. If you're going to you're a superpower, you're going to rob the resources of all the other countries, you can't just march in there. You have to have an excuse to go in there. So you fund both sides of a coup. You get a skirmish going, and then you say, oh, well, we're going to have to come in and save you from yourselves. It's a boilerplate maker thing, and so
Now,
they did the same thing there.
You mentioned Paul Craig Roberts, who's a very well-known writer in some circles, certainly never carried in our media here.
Right.
But he has there was a quote there, I don't know where it is or if you've got it, or it was something along the lines of, now that we've murdered.
Yeah, now he says effectively we're murdering Ukraine now after we murdered Iraq and Libya and Syria, and he lists several countries. Now we're murdering Ukraine.
Right.
Now, why he's worth listening to is because he was Assistant Secretary to the Treasury in the Reagan White House. And so he was up there and understood a lot of what's going on, but he's very politically aware of what's going on. And he has been writing a lot now, and he's in the alternative out on the internet. If you just Google his name, Paul Craig Roberts, that would probably be the easiest way. But he's writing very forcefully now, and he even claims that Putin really is so backed in the corner, he needs to act now, because if he doesn't do what he did in Georgia, then the whole thing is going to be lost. And you see, the majority of people in the world don't realize that Kiev, over Russia's 1,000-year history, has been the capital for most of that time.
Of
Kiev was the capital of Russia for most of its 1,000-year history.
Oh.
So it's almost like saying, Philadelphia was the original capital of the United States, so it'd be almost as if the Russians came in and took over Philadelphia and then claimed that the United States, you had the wrong government, and so now we have a right to attack you.
So, I mean, here we are, in early July 2014, the whole story of the Ukraine seems to have been, I mean, I just don't see it or hear it anymore, so I have no idea what's going on there right now.
Well, right now, the right sector, the Nazi government, which is backed, by the way, by Stephen Harper, he was the first one to go over there and shake hands with all the new Nazis in power, and then use their slogan, which is a salute to Bandera, Stefan Bandera of World War II. And when he was in power then, fighting for the Nazis to destroy Russia, they had, for example, they had given a pamphlet to all the Jews in the city of Lviv, and it said, we are going to put your heads at the feet of Hitler. And so the grandchildren of these guys are now in power. It's the first time since World War II we've had a Nazi government in power anywhere in the world.
Now, most people have not heard the word Nazi put together with the new government of the Ukraine. Right. I've read it. How sure can we be that this is actually happening? How is it, there must be various elements within the government.
There are other elements, but they are minor elements. They don't hold key positions like...
So you say the key positions within the new government of Ukraine are very...
The head guy of the military is I don't think neo-Nazi is the right word. They are, well, they're new. They're Nazis. Neo. They salute the old ideas, and they're killing people. They're using all the techniques. Those recent slaughters that took place in Donetsk, for example, they trapped all these protesters and they put them in this building. They burnt the building, the ones that got out. They strangled them and burnt some of them and said, "Long live Ukraine," which is their slogan for the Nazi putsch in Ukraine now.
That's right. That incident again was given very little coverage in the media here. People were pushed dozens and dozens of people were basically forced into a building, and the building was burnt down.
That's correct. And see, Stephen Harper is backing these same people. He's shaking their hand, saying, saying congratulations, and then he lays a wreath of flowers at the people that died at the protest, but not telling the world that these people were shot by the very people he's shaking hands with. And he says, that we're here to support you, and I speak for all of Canada that that we're here to support this new government. When in fact it's an absolute coup d'état. The government that was in charge was elected. It had problems. There was good reason to protest it, like every government. We have good reason to protest our government. They do in the States. Every country I know, the governments have reason to have good protesters, but that doesn't lead to bloodshed unless you're doing, unless you're creating a coup of that country. So when Stephen Harper claims that he's speaking for all of Canadians, that we support the new Nazi government, that's crazy, because he started, but here's the thing about why he would do this. Back in 1989, he co-founded a group called the Northern Foundation. So these are the kinds of things that your viewers can start to look up on the internet. Northern Foundation, it's a white supremacist group, and they saw their first task, which is, and when you say white supremacist, that's a Nazi friendly group, and he saw as their first task to prevent Nelson Mandela from being released from prison. Here's a guy that was set up and framed by the CIA, spent 27 years in prison, and now the world is finally saying, come on, let Nelson Mandela out of prison. And here's Stephen Harper with his new organization, trying to prevent it from happening. So, when also he comes there and says that he's speaking for the West, for Canadians, that we support this government, and this is right in line of the fact that the Crimean people, 97% vote to rejoin Russia, when in fact, when he speaks for all of Canada, he got a total of 16% of all of Canada in his last vote to be Prime Minister. So that's almost laughable to go over there. But also, when you have a criminal government that has a coup, this is a war of aggression in Ukraine, sponsored by the United States and supported by Stephen Harper, this is a very serious thing to have happen. And our criminal justice system should be investigating Stephen Harper and his support for this war of aggression.
Well, believe it or not, Bo, we're out of time. Well, we didn't even get to the Middle East, which was question 2. So we'll have to do it again at some point.
Okay, yeah, the Middle East is tied into this very intimately.
So, Paul Craig Roberts.
Yes.
And the Northern Foundation?
Northern Foundation is a group that Stephen Harper co-founded.
Look it up. Let's see what's going on. Thanks for watching this week's Citizens Forum, and thank you both.
You're welcome.